is a photographer and who can be claimed to be called or be a photographer. It's a title I still use on all my websites, social media. I put at the top photographer, because even though I do another job alongside this full time, I see myself predominantly as a photographer. And I always equate it to that film Happy Gilmore, where he's desperate to be a hockey player, and it turns out he's dog shit at hockey but brilliant using a hockey stick to play golf, and becomes a good golfer and wins golf. But he's still crap at hockey player, but he still sees himself as a hockey player. And I've always heard my wife laugh with that, because I used to actually have that on my social media handle. I'm a hockey player. Because I see myself as a photographer, because that's who I am, that's how I feel, that's how I got into the other job I also have through photography. So photography for me for the last 20 years has been the thing that's kind of cemented my whole being. And I see myself as a photographer. Plus I do still work, get commissions as a photographer. And I see myself as a photographer. And within that, there are all caveat of other things, which I bring into the party as a photographer. Other things I've learned and done prior to that, but predominantly I see myself as a photographer. And I don't use tags like semi-professional, because semi-professional means nothing. You're either a professional or you're not. And professional, particularly in the field of photography, is a very bad, it's a misnomer. It doesn't mean anything other than you earn a few quid from it, really. But the tag professional gets tagged to photography all the time. And I always say, look, a doctor is a professional, but a doctor doesn't walk around going, "Oh, I'm a professional doctor." Or, a van driver is a professional van driver for a living, but doesn't walk around going, "I'm a professional van driver." Photographers, for some reason, I think it's because they think it makes them look good, like a proper photographer, when all it really does is make them look like a twat. So I try to avoid the professional tag as much as I can. But I thought over the years, what is a photographer? What actually is a photographer? How can somebody be called a photographer? What is it about photography that makes them a photographer? I mean, obviously, I'm a human being, but I class myself as a photographer, which is a bit daft, really, because I'm a human who does photography. But I was watching the latest episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. When would it have been? Early last week. And he was interviewing Julian Lennon, who is John Lennon's son, as many of us, all of us will know. And I've followed Julian for a long time, mostly because I'm a fan of his dad. I'm a big Beatles and John Lennon fan. And it's always good to see what the kids are doing, how their lives have developed. And Julian's been one of those who's had a go at everything over the years. He's done music, he's done photography, he's done documentaries, quite a good humanitarian. He's one of the good guys, I think, really, is what I'm trying to say. So he's always had an interesting path for me to follow. But I didn't know he was on Joe Rogan, so I just came across it by chance. So I thought I'll watch this. And it was really interesting listening to him. Now, of course, I've followed his photography before. I've seen his photography. And my first reaction was a little bit like it all often is when I see people who are famous for doing other things suddenly stray into photography. I had a similar reaction when I discovered, what's his name? That really crap Canadian musician who my wife has a soft spot for. What's his bloody name? Brian Adams? Yeah, he suddenly became a photographer. So I looked at some of his work and it's all right. It's the kind of stuff that you see on internet forums where, part-timers do nice landscapes and seascapes and stuff. But there was nothing, wow. But because he's famous for being a musician, suddenly he's famous for being a photographer as well. And then another one that I stumbled across years ago was Ian Beale out of EastEnders. For non-UK viewers, EastEnders is a soap which has been running in the UK from the 80s, and the actor playing Ian Beale, Adam Woodyard, got into photography, and his work's interesting. There's a little bit of good stuff in there. Some of it's cliched, but he's a famous British actor. He's famous in Britain. Suddenly he's a photographer, so he must be a good photographer. There's kind of a bit of that to it. And then you see people like Michael Stipe from REM, who are now photographers, and a little bit of me thinks, well, it's great because it means more people are seeing photography, more people are getting into photography. It's got a wider audience. But at the same time, it pisses me off a little because I often think, hang on a minute, you've had your go at fame and fortune. You've had your big payday. You've had your worth as a musician or actor or whatever it is. Bugger off out of the photography sphere. There's enough of us here already trying to scrape a living without people like you coming along and getting your £1 million worth. So it does hurt me a little bit when that happens. Probably some of it is rooted in jealousy. But, I'm thinking, oh, fuck me. I've been at this 20 years, not achieved the level they have in one shoot because of who they are. It does piss me off. That it does make me think. And there'll be photographers out there who worked a lot harder than me over the last 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, 30, 50 years who were thinking, oh, fuck me, my work's better than his. Why aren't I getting that gig? And it does often come back to that old adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know. But it was interesting listening to Julian on this podcast because I was listening to his, talk about his work, which is quite interesting. And then at about, 1 minute 25, something like that, 1 minute, 1 hour 25 in, Joe says to him, so how did you, when you first started photography, how did you learn it? Did you take classes or? And he says, no, I have no idea what I'm doing, pretty much. So that made me go, huh? And I listened a little bit more. I listened a few times, and he says, I have no idea what I'm doing technically. And he goes on to say that I think, my kind of strength in photography is the aesthetics. I can see a shot, which is the thing I always say that is the most difficult thing to teach to students of photography. You can teach anybody all the tech stuff, but quite often they never get the thing they should be looking at. And I've spoke about it in other podcasts where I've talked about I spent too much time being technically good or trying to be technically good and ended up missing the shot because I was that busy faffing about with tech. So I guess Julian's never going to have that problem because he doesn't know how the camera works. And he goes on to say that he kind of relies on the camera, the auto settings, a good quality camera to get the picture because he hasn't got a clue what he's doing in that respect. And it led me to question that thing even further. All right, then. So if you look on his biographies anywhere, if you look even on Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube, if you look on the credits, it says Julian Lennon's a Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, photographer, author, filmmaker. And I thought, well, what then makes a photographer? What is a photographer? Why do I call myself a photographer? Why does Julian call himself a photographer? Why do people say Julian Lennon's a photographer? Why is Michael Stipe a photographer? And I thought, what is it about photography? What is it about the art form, that thing that makes you a photographer? So I thought I'd get into that a little bit today because I think fundamentally it pisses me off that people can come out of nowhere and suddenly be pronounced as profound photographers because they've made some nice pictures. So over the last few days I've been going through this and thinking about it, and I've been equating all sorts of jobs to this and that, and what does this mean, and what, I really kind of like driving myself a bit nuts trying to answer the question. And I got some, I think, answers myself, but it'd be interesting at the end to see you guys comment and feedback to me on what you think a photographer is. So I started thinking about other photographers I know, other photographers I've come across, other photographers whose work I kind of like or dislike or I'm interested in, to see where the best photography was, and to see then how those photographers who made, in my opinion, the best photography approached it. And for me, I guess where I'm starting from is I'm saying to be a photographer, you have to understand how a camera works, why it works, what to do with that camera in that scenario before you've put it to your eye and took the picture, found the shot. And I think if you don't do that and can't do that, you can't possibly know what the shot's going to be. The shot is just an happen chance, and anybody can do that. And I just want to reiterate, I'm not trying to put it down on anybody. I'm not trying to belittle anybody. I'm not saying people are shit. I mean, some of the work in Julian Lennon's book is great. But calling somebody a photographer who literally points and shoots, I'm not saying that you can't see the shot, because that's, quite honestly, that is the most difficult part of the whole thing, to teach somebody how to get the shot. Does it make you a photographer if you get lucky? I don't think it does. I think if somebody said to me, pick any picture off any of my websites, if you go on my burkittphoto.com and look at my fashion and portrait stuff, if you look on lanceburkitt.com and see all the other stuff I do, pick any picture and ask me what the setup was, how I set up, how I approached it, and I'll be able to tell you. And I'll be able, if you walked into my studio 5 minutes later, I'll be able to set it up and recreate it for you. Because as a photographer, I understand the camera, the lens, how it all works, the technical attributes of it, the physical attributes of it, the aesthetic attributes of what that creates. And then have my mind's eye when I'm seeing a picture. I also shoot knowing that the limitations of my camera are this, so in the edit I have to do that to make them how I want them to be. I then have repeatable processes for black and whites, for desaturations, for all manner of things, because I've practiced it and understood it. And nothing's left to chance, nothing's left to auto, nothing at all. You guys all already know my feelings on auto and AI and all that stuff. So I believe I can call myself a photographer, and I believe I have the right to call other people who don't quite have that level of understanding and conception as guys or girls with cameras. There's been a lot of chat around AI this last while, mainly because it's been pumped out really quickly by Adobe and all the other game players. I think, quite honestly, behind all that are some very, 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 very nefarious reasons for that. It's not as clear cut as what people might think it is. You only have to look at the way all of the companies, particularly Adobe, blasted out AI when it's clearly A, not ready, and B, people weren't really that interested. So it seems like there's a bit of a panic, or they pushed the panic button a bit too quick, I think. When they realised ChatGTP and other things were starting to get a bit prominent, they thought, oh my God, we better get a piece of that cake. Off they went. That's the official story, but I think there's, behind the scenes, I think it's all a bit nefarious and a little bit dangerous, shall we say. I have a feeling in life that when somebody tells you, this is the way it has to be, this is how it's going to be, you can't ignore it, it's going to happen, you must embrace it. My gut reaction, my natural reaction is to run as fast as I can in the opposite direction, because in my life experience, 9.9 times out of 10, when somebody says that, the reasons behind it are never good for you, for society, for humanity. There's a big clamber currently for, let's get into AI, let's do AI, let's make sure we're using AI, you must embrace AI. And my kind of reaction to that is no. And he was on the garden before. And one of my concerns with this process is that people will become used to poorer quality and accept poorer quality because it's quick. And I think particularly for those people who have spent a lot of time learning techniques to make digital art very good, will probably have their work kind of stolen, erased, belittled, because people become so locked in to this quick, fast, easy way of doing it. You've not done any trimming, you've not tied anything up. Well, that's not what the advert says. The advert says, hit this button, hit that button, look what you can do. And that's not what happens. And my bigger concern is that that's what people are going to buy into. And creatives, I'm one of them, are notoriously lazy. We want the easiest way from A to B, because this is hard work. Photography, art, retouching, digitizing, all that stuff's difficult, hard work and time consuming. So we do want the shortcut when we can get one. But a shortcut that takes away the quality and also takes away, more importantly, your learning, in my opinion, should be, you should run away from it as quick as you can. And I worry for the future of the creative arts if all artists of all types are going to get plumbed into this AI way of thinking. Waking up in the morning, hitting generative fill, churning out dribble because everybody loves it, everybody's saying it's great. Clients who, let's face it, in the main, even the high-end clients are quite visually illiterate most of the time, loving it because their clients are loving it, because people who consume this don't know any better. Eventually, before very long, and it's happening now because I talk to people, it's happening now, creatives will be overlooked and they won't need it. And I think it's down to us to kind of fight back for our industry a little bit and not follow the narrative of you've got to get involved with it because it's not going away. That's just bullshit. That's a cop-out. That's just a way of saying, oh, you can't fight it, can you? So let's not. No, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it all the way. But I'm certainly not going to be doing what I've just showed you here and hitting buttons and wanging sliders around just because somebody's saying to me it's the future. You can't avoid it. You must get into it. If you don't, you'll be a dinosaur, blah, blah, blah. All I see in all the AI stuff I see is the same drivel. Time after time after time after time. No distinct features, no distinct style, no distinct quality. All the same. Over-processed, over-egged, left to something else as devices. Generic rubbish. And, of course, be the creative they want to be, use the techniques they want to use. But for me personally, and for anybody I teach, I will teach that AI is not the future. It doesn't have to be the future. What is the future is you, your learning, your passion, your commitment, and your style and quality. You know, some of the greatest literature at all came out of Britain. Some of the greatest visuals, artists came out of Britain. And if all we're going to do is reduce all that learning to typing a prompt in to let an algorithm decide the best bits and then we decide ourselves, that's not thinking, that's not learning, that's not creating, that's, for want of a better phrase, it's cheating. Because if you're letting a machine do that work for you, what are you learning about your process? You're not learning anything. All you're doing is sitting back and drinking tea while a piece of software makes decisions for you. Stop doing that. It doesn't have to be like that. Just because people on TV and on the internet say it's the future, we've got to embrace it, doesn't mean you have to. Why are we doing that? Why would we want to get into that just because a bunch of tech nerds and, you know, other not very nice people are forcing this on people because it's the future, because you can't stop, what was it the kids say? You can't stop progress. Well, I can, and I will. And it kind of frustrates me that people don't have the cojones to go, why? The truth is the truth, is the truth. The truth doesn't care what you think the truth is. The truth is the truth. And you can go around and tell people what you believe is the truth, or your version of the truth is, or what somebody else's version of the truth is. But realistically, the truth is the truth. And when you apply that to photography, I've heard people say the truth doesn't matter in photography because you're telling stories, which is true, I guess, to a certain extent. But I think it does apply particularly in certain types of photography, and we'll talk about that. But as a photographer, I think part of my passion for what I do, for people to believe in me, is that what they're seeing is a true representation of what I've done, or what I've seen, or what story I'm telling. So I think fundamental to the success of photography and photographers is their ability to tell the truth. And quite often it appears that the truth is a bit loose in photography. And we'll look at some examples and we'll see how that kind of comes through in the media particularly. But we'll look at a bit of other people's work. We'll talk about a few examples. We'll look again briefly at the history of photography and see how true or otherwise things are there. And then we'll look at some of my own work and I'll give some examples as to what the truth actually is, what the truth means, how loose we can be with the truth, and how much fibbing, shall we say, goes on in photography. How difficult it is to detect, how difficult it is sometimes to walk the line, to decide whether it's true or not, how much fabrication is allowed in all manner of different genres of photography. But I think truth is something in life which is kind of obscured a lot, particularly in the mainstream media. The truth is really important to the narrative you're trying to tell. And so that got me thinking about other truths in photography. And I know from teaching photography for a good while and talking to other photographers about photography for a long time, there's a whole manner of fakery and the reasons for that. Some of it's moral, some of it's immoral. Some photographers don't think it even matters. So it just got me thinking about that whole thing about truth. And then this week we've had some awful events happen in Southport, and I was watching the media carefully as to how it was reported, and blatantly the narratives are just so obscured and outright lies. Mainstream media narratives, I mean, that the truth is, well, we live in a post-truth world is what it really comes down to. So I thought I'd discuss it a little bit about the truth in photography, or post-truth in photography, and we'll see where we get and see what you guys think. Might seem a bit strange to us now, but there are a whole manner of Victorian photographers that specialise in photographing dead people, dead babies, dead kids, dead grandma and granddads, anybody. And part of the setup they used for that were things like stands. I'll show an example here, post-mortem technique, where it's claimed that they use a stand, a bit like something you might use to hold a mannequin up. So the dead person could be lifted, raised to be stood, could be seated, could be kneeling, could be leaning. And these contraptions are used to allow photographers to do that and to make dead people appear like they're alive. That led me down a few bizarre avenues, as you might imagine, and one of them was looking at a guy called General Lee, who you probably heard of. He was the leader of the Confederate Army in the American Civil War. And at first glance, you look at this picture and you think, well, it's just a bloke stood there. But when you look closer, if you zoom in, you can see clearly that there's a stand right behind him. So, like that stand that I just showed you there, there's one directly behind the general here. So, this picture is purported to be him alive at some shindig. But my sentiment, my kind of like inquisitiveness made me think, well, how do we know he's alive? A little bit of makeup, a little bit of shine, stand him on the pose. Is he alive or dead? And that led me then to finding out further truths or in-truths in that kind of era, mid-late 1800s, early 1900s, and as to whether anything you can see photographically is real. And I think some people think this was like they used it so people knew how to pose, which is just bullshit to me. Photography had been around, even if you believe the mainstream narrative about the history of photography. Photography around here for donkey's years, so they know how to stand and pose for a still photograph. I just found that very interesting, and from that, so thinking about truth, I started to link it back to modern day truths, particularly within politics and stuff. But before that, I remembered another picture from my book, The Obfuscation of Photography, and I looked at Abraham Lincoln, and how for many, 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 many years, for an eternity, people thought this picture of Lincoln was a photograph of Lincoln, and it turned out it wasn't a photograph of Lincoln at all. It was a photograph of some other mush with Lincoln's head pasted onto it. So again, why they did this why didn't they just take a picture of Lincoln? I don't know. Was Lincoln dead? Is that a wax head of Lincoln stuck on there? Who knows? But it comes back down to that. We can't trust photography ever to tell us the truth, even in a mainstream timeline of its relative new invention. Even straight off the bat, the line, things have been obscured, hidden, lied about, which, helps them paint their pictures, their narratives, their histories, but doesn't help us as observers being able to determine whether a photograph's good, useful, truthful, of its time, total fabrication or not. It's very difficult for us to be able to see. Well, we can't go that far back unless we borrow the old time machine from somebody. So we're kind of left picking at the bones of all sorts of narratives, which again, I've said this before, I think is part of the reason they do that. It's to make us unable to find actual truths, and we have to kind of surmise things through deduction and using your noggin. The raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, and it supposedly purports American soldiers raising the flag on the Japanese island Iwo Jima. It does show some American soldiers raising a flag on an island called Iwo Jima. But again, it's one of those stories where the narrative's changed over the years. I can remember when I first looked into this 15, 20 years ago, and the narrative on it then was, yes, it was staged after the event. It didn't happen spontaneously. They didn't arrive. The photographer wasn't there. It wasn't all, oh my God, look what's just happened. Let's take a picture. It was staged later. But in the intervening years, that narrative's changed now to now, oh, we did raise a flag initially, but it was a different picture. So now it's a two photographer thing. So the staff photographer that was with them took the other picture, which was raised first. That one there, you can see. If I just click on Wikipedia, you can see that was the first one that was raised. And then there is it Rosenthal that did? Yeah, Joe Rosenthal. That one there is the one that everybody knows, which was restaged later. But why the need for restaging it? Because if you've got this picture down here by the staff photographer Lewis R. Lowry, perfectly good picture. If that's true, if that happened spontaneously, why the need to recreate the other one? Now, this picture I'd not seen until I came back to research this a couple of days ago. So this has been inserted into the narrative in the last 20 years since I researched this initially. So that tells me that things happen to tell different stories, because there's nothing more powerful than the truth, and particularly truth in photography. So the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which is grim, but not a surprise to me considering the other assassinations that have happened and attempts that have tried to happen over the years. But of course, straight away when it happened, people are already saying, oh, it's fake, it's set up, it's a false flag, inside job, all that other stuff. But let's just assume for now that somebody did try to shoot Donald Trump. He survived it and he got nicked in the ear. And there are a couple of good photographers there. One of which is called Doug Mills, who took a photograph right at the moment where one of the bullets whizzed past DT. And if we look at this closely, they've circled what they believe is I'm guessing it's an air wave, an air passage where the bullets gone past and caused disturbance in the air. And the camera's picked it up. And the piece I read goes through a whole range of reasons why it's entirely possible that at 1/8000th of a second at f1.8 that streak could be caught. I'm a little bit more skeptical about that, because 1/8000th of a second sounds fast until you've got a missile that's moving as fast as a speeding bullet, even a bullet that's already travelled 600 feet or whatever it was. So I'm a bit dubious. Now, I'm not saying that Doug Mills, who was a great photographer, has faked this, but narratives are fake. We've just seen how narratives are faked all the time. Faked to help narratives, to change people's thoughts and feelings. And if we look back at what we just looked at perhaps dead General Lee, the fake body and just the head of Abe Lincoln, the staging of the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, would it surprise you if this was a fabrication, a fake, a dud? Wouldn't surprise me at all. I hope it isn't, because I always live in hope that photographers are going to be genuine and the people that represent photographers are going to be genuine. But I'm not really convinced one way or the other of that incident currently. But it's just interesting to note that even here we are, what are we, end of the World War to now 80 years, almost past Iwo Jima, and we still can't fully believe photographs. The real history of photography. Okay, so I've posted a few micro blogs before, and I've done a little bit of chatter on some videos I posted about the real history of photography and what that might actually look like. Like most people, I suppose, when I got into photography, I was really into things like David Bailey, Richard Avedon, Ansel Adams stuff which is more kind of like modern, or not modern now, but modern in photography terms. And looking back at those, like 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, that was kind of like where my real inspirations were. So when I first got into photography, I wasn't really interested in the history of photography as such. I was into things like David Bailey for fashion, Richard Avedon. I got into other areas as my kind of career got going, but really 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that kind of period was kind of like, probably still is the most iconic period of photography, and the people that seem to have got or had the most influence on modern photographers. So looking back at further back in history of photography, it wasn't really on my radar. It was only when I started doing my master's degree in 2015, 16, 17, I even really started looking past tense at photography and where some more of its origins may have been. And that only really came from looking at photographers like Stieglitz, Ansel Adams, some of the more kind of like what you might call creative art photographers, those guys who were doing real good work, real high quality work, but who were probably only known in photography circles. Ansel Adams was a bit more famous and widely known. So I'd not really delved into the history of photography that much. I was kind of like hooked, like most people are, on the ones who were really famous and the ones that you know. So it took me a little while to kind of branch out from that. But what I've noticed in life is that quite often, always, history is written by people who don't really want you to know the truth. They want you to know their version of the truth. And as I started looking into past photography and photography origins, if you like, I started to notice that a lot of what was being passed off as key information or true information was actually opinion and wasn't information at all. So as I began to look back and find inspirations, particularly in with Stieglitz and his equivalent series, just the simplicity of it, the more I realised around that time that the art world absolutely shunned photography. The art world was never going to accept photography as an art form, and doesn't really to this day. The fact that it took millions of years to get David Bailey into the portrait gallery is kind of testament to the fact that artists won't accept photography as being an art form. It's just a couple of buttons you push. It's a mechanical process. It's not an art form. You know, and I do. Any photographer worth salt knows that photography is the ultimate art form. When you've mastered photography and you understand its capabilities, I don't think there's many, if any, better art forms out there. That includes music, painting, performance. I would stand photography above all them in terms of an art form. The actual history of photography that's taught, and more as I looked at it, I started branching into, that was never taught to me. Why have I never come across that before? And it seemed to me that whilst I was researching stuff, 2015, 16, 17, and then post-master's degree, when I started writing academic papers and onto a book, it felt like things were being written as I was reading them. Wedgwood started to appear quite a lot. Fox Talbot became more prominent. It was almost as if Wikipedia was reading my mind. It was like the people who edit Wikipedia and more wider edit our history started to put more and more photographic history in to our sphere, because I think more and more people were starting to question the origins. And as I discovered whilst I was researching this, that by no means am I the first person to say, hang on a minute, pretty sure that's not right, pretty sure that doesn't feel right, sure that photography must go back further than that. And I found a whole bunch of people who had the same sentiment and who had done their own research, and I built on that. So I'm quite happy to admit a little bit of standing on the shoulder of giants as I went along. But I think I took my research in slightly different avenues to what they did. Most people, particularly academic researchers or mainstream researchers, are a little bit fearful of being cancelled because they have incomes, they have status to maintain. So quite often researchers push a line but don't push it any further. Well, I didn't really have anything to lose in that respect. I've never really cared what people think about me. I've always tried to tell the truth. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, I just think if you're going to tell somebody a story, particularly about their history, then tell them the truth, or tell them the truth as you see it and find it. So that's what I did. And I became a little bit estranged from academia during that period. I found it difficult to get on board with their thinking and their dismissance of certain things. And hopefully you'll go buy the book at some point, The Obfuscation of Photography, and reading that, and I kind of explain at some length why I distance myself from academia, even though it's written in an academic way, utilising references. I do talk in there about what my relationship with academia became, having looked in depth at the real history of photography. And not just photography, because the book branches into other areas of life, because photography didn't exist in a void, it never did. What I'm going to do for this podcast is I'm just going to briefly go through some points in my book to kind of help generally people understand that the history of photography is not what it is pertained to be in the history books, in Wikipedia, and in all those libraries up and down the land that tell you that it was invented in the early 1800s by a French guy called Niepce. In my eyes, that period was more of a remembering of photography rather than an invention of, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to start with a little bit more about realisation, and then I'm going to go through the list of chapters, but I'm going to be very brief, just to give you an overview of how I came to my conclusions. I said 1826 to 27, not quite sure when. Invention of photography by Niepce, closely followed by Mr. Daguerre, who is then more famous for more widely producing it, making it, inventing it, giving it to the world. The history for all that is very, very thin. And if I had my teaching hat on or my lecturing hat on, and a student gave me the history of photography that you can find for that version of the history of photography as an essay with proofs taken from what you could find that I found, I would be making them go and think about it again and write it again, because there is not much in the way of absolute proof. So 5000 BC, similar time to bitumen today, glass and bitumen. Got a couple of components there for photography. But glass can be used for multiple things, so it can also be used as a lens. So I'm thinking, lens. How far back can we find a lens? So again, according to academia, first accepted reference for the use of a lens was in a play by Aristophanes in 423 AD. So again, 2,500 years ago, we've got lenses mentioned. So we've got bitumen in Judea, we've got glass, we've got lenses. And that's a lot of time, I think, for people who were very clever. Talking about a time when philosophers were rife, when all sorts of things were going down around the world, and nobody thought to combine those things until some Frenchman happened upon it in the 1800s. So I kept digging, and I was coming forward a little bit, and I kind of found out that, again, glasses that we use, spectacles, when you consider we've got glass and the use of lenses 3,500 years ago, that the first glasses weren't used until 1290 in Italy. I think that's a little strange as well. And I'll get onto why I think things are like that a little later on. But putting these things together, I'm starting to think things being hidden here, things not quite right. And then I came across a book by what people of the time might call a kook, or a magician, or a wizard, or a witch, or a con man. And when you read this book, which is called Natural Magic, and it's by a guy who you would call a scholar and a polymath, Giambattista della Porta, his name is, if I've said that right. the book Natural Magic, the more I got into it, the more it became quite obvious to me that it was a manual for photography. And this is 1585. So, for anybody that doesn't know, in 2020, when the world went crazy over a cold, I spent the time that summer finishing off an idea I'd had for a book off the back of writing an academic paper in 2018, looking at the theft or the obfuscation of photography. And by that I mean I believe that photography has been around forever, as long as people have been able to see. And I think I went some way to proving that in my book, The Obfuscation of Photography. And that was a couple of years of research, observation, doing test work myself, building cameras and devices to take pictures that are supposed to not work. So within that research, I came across a couple of researchers who had decided, building on somebody else's research, to look at whether the Shroud of Turin is in fact a photograph rather than a wrap. And I think they proved pretty soundly that it's entirely possible that the Shroud of Turin is a photograph. The thing we don't have is the names of the people who made the photograph, but they're my number one all-time favourite photographers, because two reasons. One, because I think it's about the oldest surviving photograph we've got and we can prove it's a photograph. But B, whoever they were and whyever they were, they had the cojones, the know-how to do it. And for that reason alone, they're my all-time favourite photographer stroke-ers, because having the balls then to take a photograph of whether it's Jesus Christ or just somebody called Jesus or just a person, using that rudimentary proto-photography as it's called, is quite brilliant. And I used those techniques they were using and some of the equipment they were using. I used the same processes or similar process to make my own photographs, which worked, which need days and weeks and months sometimes of exposure to work. But when you think about it, when you've got a dead body that's laid there, you've certainly got an ample amount of time before the body decomposes to photograph it. And I think in this case, this is what happened, that the person was photographed for days, weeks, months using rudimentary photography, proto-photography, to make an image. And that's what we see. And if you read the work by Picknett and Allen and the doctor, whose name escapes me, I'm going to put it on screen now because my memory's shot to shit, who first started considering that the Shroud might be a photograph. If you look at their findings, their proofs, if you like, that it could be a photograph because they reproduced it using equipment available at the time. The only way they differ to me is they suggest it can't be of Jesus because the timings are wrong, carbon dating and all that. They believe, I think, that it's Leonardo da Vinci that made it, but it can't be of Christ or Jesus because the timing is wrong. In my book, I researched that a little bit wider and discussed the adding of 1,000 years of non-dark age that didn't exist, which fundamentally then aligns that it could have been somebody called Jesus from the time Jesus is supposed to have been alive. You'll have to read the book to get into detail. I don't want to go into detail here. But suffice to say, the Shroud of Turin, in my opinion, is definitely a photograph, and one of many that have been obfuscated from that time and more closer to our times. Talk at length in the book about Da Vinci and how his fumato process is actually a print process, and many pictures he's noted for painting are actually photographs, which were potentially then painted over to hide the fact they were photographs or are still photographs. You just can't see the original for various reasons. If you look at this fumato process, it's a print process. That's not painting. So the fact that the Shroud of Turin is, in my view, the oldest surviving photograph that we're aware of. I mean, I say in the foreword to my book, the oldest surviving photograph is not The View from the Window at the Grass by Joseph Nies von Niepce from either 1826 or 27. And it's not even close to being the oldest photograph. That's why I'm saying that, because my research took me back at least 5,000 years when the ingredients and the camera obscura existed. And it's not much of a leap from painting what are clearly gods and godlike things on caves to photographing them. So my top one photographer or photographers of all time are the people or persons that photograph the Shroud of Turin, because quite simply, in my view, it's the oldest surviving photograph we can access. I'm pretty sure that the Vatican and other places have got probably older ones, which they'll never allow us to see, us mere mortals, but doesn't mean they don't exist. And I think the more people in photography that understand the obfuscation of it, the theft of it, the hiding of it across time, the more we look at other things like events that are told in history to have happened one way when really they potentially happened another. And you can understand why photography would be hidden, can't you? Because you think about all those, that 1,000 years, you think about, imagine having actual photography or photos from the Roman era, or from, let's say, the Dark Ages did exist from that era, or from anything up to the Napoleonic Wars, Civil Wars, conquistadors, all that stuff. Imagine having photographs of all that. What truths they may tell. So, in my opinion, through deep research, practice, and evaluation, I believe that the whole of the history of photography has been obfuscated, hidden, for nefarious reasons. But if you read the book, it's only a tenner on Amazon. You can have a look at why I think that and why I came to the conclusions I did. But within that, 100% I can tell you that the number one favourite photographer of mine of all time is the person or persons that photographed the Shroud of Turin, because in my highly educated view, it's the oldest surviving photograph we've got that we can access. So there you have it, the people who photographed the Shroud of Turin. But really I want to talk about how freedoms have been affected this last month and what effect that might have on photography moving forward. And as you might have guessed, listening to my previous podcasts and my other musings, I'm a big advocate for freedom. And why might that be? Well, in my view, as a human being, as a natural born human, freedom is all you have. Freedom is everything. Freedom to think, freedom to move, freedom to breathe, freedom to do what you want, so long as you're not doing any harm to others. And we already have enough laws and rules and regulations in the world, and particularly the UK. But it seems to me that various governments and the people, the real governments, the people who are behind the people you see on the telly, the actual governments, have got this narrative where they're pushing more and more and more. The real people behind the scenes, the people who are actually pulling the strings, the real power, have always had a fear of regular people being free. And it's become quite apparent, particularly in the UK in this last month, that those freedoms that we still just are hanging on to need to be eradicated, and things are allowed to happen for these very reasons. So that most of the chat has been around freedom of speech, but we are starting to stray into areas of freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And when we get into freedom of thought and expression, clearly then that starts to impinge on photography and visual communication. And for me, it's not a giant leap to say you can't say that on Twitter, or you can't write that on Twitter or on Facebook. It's not that much of a leap to say you can't take a photograph of that. So that's what I'm going to kind of get into today. Going to look at some of the ramifications around losing freedoms, what it really means for creators and human beings, as outside of creativity. Just fix my mic up because I felt like I was almost laying down. So freedom, we take it for granted, and I think sometimes people forget that freedom's everything, and we're kind of so caught up in good, bad, right, wrong, law, lawful, unlawful, that quite often we knee-jerk react to things, and the general public are quite easy to manipulate with knee-jerk reactions. And currently the mood in the country is kind of, there's a big divide, but I think that divide is not as kind of clear cut or as big on one side as to what the narrative is saying it is. I think generally speaking, people are pissed off with successive governments, things they allow to happen, things that they say they're going to fix and never do. And I understand all those frustrations. But they fundamentally all come back to that idea of freedom. And whilst freedom is everything, and freedom should be everything, as a society, we do have to live within some kind of framework. Otherwise, it would just be bonkers. People would literally just be bonkers. And I think to live as a liberal with freedom, you've also got to have responsibility of your actions. And by that, what I mean is, just because you're free and you're allowed freedom of speech and you're allowed freedom of thought and you're allowed freedom of creativity, let's say, doesn't necessarily follow that you should do certain things. Now, by what I mean by that is, if you're not hurting anybody, if you're not directly hurting anybody in a hateful way, in a hurtful way, in a spiteful way, in a nasty way, crack on. Be that person. If you're going to allow freedom to let you be a bastard and let you be awful and let you treat people like shit and get away with it, then that's another thing entirely. Freedom's all well, freedom's everything, but you have to use it with some morals and a little bit of savvy. And there's that old adage, isn't there? Treat people as you would expect them to treat you. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people just see any excuse to be vile and hide behind freedom of speech, which is not really what it's for, is it? Freedom comes with responsibility, I think. Now, I'm an advocate for being born with freedom. You should get freedom as a default value. You shouldn't have to earn your freedom ever. It should be given as a default value. But as a human being, having that default value should enable you to use it wisely and with some morals and with some respect. So that's kind of my position. While I'm saying freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of creativity is everything for me, it comes with a caveat of, but be respectful, don't be a dick, don't use it as an excuse to go and raid shops and smash them up and pillage, because quite rightly, if you do that, you're going to get yourself 3 years in jail, and you would deserve that, because under no other circumstance would you do that. If you're going to go out looting on the back of it purporting to be part of a protest, then you're a knobhead, you're an idiot, and you get all the jail time you deserve. And that's kind of happened a little bit in this last while, so I don't want to dig too far into the politics of it, but really it's difficult to avoid it, particularly when you see histories repeating themselves and one or two people in power have the choice to put you in jail for a minor error of judgment, or you were just a dick that day and you deserved a rap on the knuckles, but jail, no. Whilst clearly allowing other people who have done much, much worse crimes to roam free. So freedom feels a bit all to cock currently. And so let's start by having a look at the word freedom. We have it touted around all the time, don't we? That legendary speech from Mel Gibson in Braveheart. What was it? You might take our bodies or whatever, but you'll never take our freedom. Something shit like that, wasn't it? It's all about freedom. And people have fought for freedom since date dot, because quite often people who are stronger than physically and financially bully them into submission and take their freedoms, when we're all born with natural freedoms and we all lose them the minute we're born. Well, the minute your mum and dad sign that piece of paper that's called a birth certificate, your freedom's gone from then. But the word freedom in the English dictionary, in the Oxford Languages bit of the dictionary. Let's have a look at what it actually means. Freedom. I'll read out a couple of these examples. Noun: freedom. Freedom from, freedom froms, plural noun, freedoms. 1. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants. So, like I said, you got freedom to do what the hell you want, so long as you're not hurting anybody. That should be a given. And now you could argue that hurting people, it could be a blurry line. But I think we really all know, don't we? When you're being an arse and a twat and a noisy neighbour, or a dick on the road, or picking on somebody because they're different to you. Just because you got the freedom to do it doesn't mean you should do it. So I think we all kind of sensible people, not that there's many of those around to be fair, understand the kind of basic freedom idea. Power to act, speak and think as you want. Next example: absence of subjection to foreign domination or despotic government. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? Depending on your colours, whether you buy into the left-right paradigm, which I think is a paradigm set to keep people squabbling. There are many other directions other than left and right. Let's think on those terms. But currently, many people feel we have a despotic government, and I think when you have a proposed democracy like we're supposed to have, then you have a leader of a party whose slim majority got him in power on very few votes, can wake up one day and decide to put the full weight of the law on a particular group of people. We're walking into despot territory, aren't we? Let's be honest about that. So we need to think about that as a society. We might agree that certain people should be thrown in jail for being dickheads, but should they? Is that power? Is that power given to 1, 2, 3 people? Just, I would argue it never is. The power to self-determination attributed to the will, quality of being, and or fate. I'll try that one again. The power of self-determination attributed to the will, the quality of independent of fate or necessity. I like that. Attributed to the will, the quality of being independent of fate or necessity. Self-determination. I'm a free man. I won't hurt you. I will be good, but I want to be free. What's wrong with that? The state of being unrestricted and able to move easily. Now, mission creep from governments. They've been after something called digital ID for a long time. And what that boils down to is everywhere you go, they know who you are, what you are, shoe size, where you've been, what you've spent, what your favourite colour is, what you like, what you don't like, what you said, what you've not said. That doesn't attach itself to freedom at all. If you're going to run from anything, run from digital ID. But the state of being unrestricted and able to move easily. When smart motorways started being introduced, whatever it was, 10 years ago, so I remember saying to my friends at the time, friends and family at the time, you don't think they're making these smart motorways with all these cameras everywhere just for your safety, do you? And they weren't for safety, because look at the amount of crashes, fatal crashes on smart motorways since they got rid of the hard shoulder. There's nothing about safety, but there is now a camera every few miles, in every direction, in every junction. If they want to restrict your movement, mission creep, the easiest way they can do it is to watch where you travel. And we've seen in places like Oxford, where they're trialling 15-minute cities, where you have everything you want within 15 minutes of your house and you never leave it. Now, what the hell has any of that got to do with freedom? Freedom to travel, for me, is as vital as the freedom to think, freedom to speak, freedom to breathe. And part of the wider remit from all the governments that are part of the World Economic Forum is to stop you moving. And I think part of the current narrative is to play into that very thing. And then I read an article today about whichever minister it is, whichever tosspot minister is in charge of transport or whatever it is now. Is it Gove maybe? Looking at bringing in a pay per mile idea. So whether you have to pay for fuel and pay per mile on top of that, or you instead of buying fuel, by the gallon. You pay per mile, whatever it is, tax, insurance. That's clearly designed to make people on low income not travel, not be able to travel, not be able to afford to travel. Now you could argue the Greens and the lefty loonies who are into climate change will argue that it's a good thing to get people out of cars. Well, it might be if we had an infrastructure for public transport where people could still get around. But that's never been looked after since it was privatised, and that's specifically so only posh people with lots of money can travel. They don't want the middle class and the lower class Joes travelling anywhere. That's clear. When you tie all these things together and join the dots, it's pretty clear there's a narrative there. So freedom to travel is another thing which, off the back of the current climate, with riots and all that other stuff, freedoms to speak, freedoms to think, freedoms to travel are going to start to be chipped away at. And again, that affects photographers. Have you read 1984, George Orwell? Got it here somewhere. 1984, George Orwell. Now in that he talks about the telly that talks to them, tells them what to do and think, and plays an anthem and makes them all do it. If you haven't read it, have a read, and then think about it. Lay it over your life, lay it over what you go through now as a normal person and as a photographer. And when you've got Joe Blogs in the street saying, oh, you can't take my picture, or you've got some security guard saying you can't take a picture of this house, blah blah blah, look at all the cameras everywhere, even in your own house. Your friend Amazon, Alexa, whatever the hell she's called, when you pick your phone up, you've been having a conversation with your wife and it starts bringing up curtains, even though you've never searched for it ever. We accept it, intrusion. We accept lack of freedom. And a bit like I said a few podcasts back about photography eating itself, because we give it all away. Humans are giving freedoms away, and freedom is eating itself. And what we need to do as a society is to go, whoa, my house is my private place. I don't want TV listening to me. I don't want my phone listening to me. I don't want XYZ listening. I don't want a freaking Ring doorbell watching me every time I go out to my car and driving off. Because the first time I do something wrong, Ethel from next door will be straight onto the old bill. Look what Lance's done, I've got some proof here. But everyone was sucked into that through fear. So today's topic is going to quite simply be working in the industry, but more precisely looking at the work or not work that's out there for photographers, and in particular the money that's offered to photographers, and how there's a complete disconnect between expectation of quality of photography and experience and the money that companies are willing to pay photographers. I do a lot of research, and I see quite often really poorly paid jobs that are advertised for people who have got masses and masses of experience. Whilst I'm looking for freelance work, I always come across staff photography jobs, and 9.995 times out of 10 the pay for these jobs and for the conditions which are offered within the job are pretty horrific. So what I'm going to do today is look at the problems within photography, really about how we find work, why work is so poorly paid, the reactions we've had to that over the years, and maybe I can find a few solutions. But the solutions part, you'll discover that we're all in it together. There are no solutions without being in it together. So we'll get to that shortly. But really, I wanted to talk about work. I'm going to start off by talking about some of my own experience, but then I'm going to get into jobs, and we'll look at some jobs and some job specs and some financial rewards for those job specs, and how photographers in the main are shafted and poorly treated, and see what you think about it as I go along. So in photography, there are a few different routes into employment, and by employment I mean earning money from it. And what I don't mean by that is calling yourself a professional photographer and expecting that suddenly you're going to be buying a Ferrari. The word professional is a little bit of a misnomer. I've started using it again. I don't quite know why. I'm going to have to get rid of it. But all professional means really is that you earn a few bob from it. You do it for a living. And it doesn't equate to you being any good. So I try to avoid that phrase photography if I can. But I have got sucked back into using it recently, to my shame. But being a professional in any walk of life is about doing it for a living. And as a photographer, you want to be paid for doing what you're doing. And quite often, particularly people who are just coming into the industry trying to find their feet, start out by doing things for free or dirt cheap. And what tends to happen is they then never elevate above that, because everybody is expecting them to keep at the same rate or at the same price forever, regardless of more experience gain, regardless of cost of living, regardless of all those other things that play into time. So the first mistake all photographers make, and I made this as well, was thinking that you've not been going that long, you shouldn't be charging too much for it. What you need to think is, should I be charging it all, or should I be charging what I'm worth? And what I mean by that is, if you're offering photography which is substandard because you're not charging what you think you're really worth for it, then why are you charging somebody at all? Let me see if I can find an example. If you had let's say a young apprentice car mechanic who had seen his mentor change a couple of wheels, or maybe change a battery, do an oil change, and decided to earn a few bob on the side, he would do it himself at home at weekends or in the evenings or whatever. And he had some of the tools and some of the experience. But because he was new, he was charging, let's say, 30 quid for a full service. And the garage might charge 200, 300 quid for a full service. Why is he only charging 20 and 30 quid? If he can perform a service to the level that a garage can, which is the only reason he will be doing it, why is he not charging 300 quid? All right, let's say he knocks a few bob off for, no premises, all them other bits that come with owning a garage. But why is he doing it so dirt cheap? Is it because he's crap at it? If so, why would you even give him 30 quid for it? Or is it more because he hasn't realised his worth? And it's the same in photography. If you're at a place where you're confident enough to say to your auntie, your uncle, or whoever, your cousin, I'll photograph your wedding for you, but just give me 50 quid and it'll be right. What are you saying about the quality of work you're giving them? Are you admitting that you're crap really and you shouldn't be charging them? Or are you saying, well, I don't really value myself at all, you can stand on me for the rest of your life? Because Auntie and Uncle Jim are never going to give you 2,000 quid for doing the wedding, or the sister, daughter, son, friend's wedding, once you've done it for 50 quid. They're just not. And even if you become a world famous photographer, your friends, family, people who you've worked with on low rates initially are going to always assume they get family rates, mates rates, and never appreciate what you do. My first suggestion as to why photographers have got ourselves into this pickle is, it's not a recent thing. Yes, it's been exacerbated since digital came along and everybody and the great grandma thinks they can get a camera for Christmas and by Easter be a professional. There is a lot of that involved. Some professional, using that term loosely, photographers have also shafted us all by charging silly rates when they should be charging standard rates. And it's one of the few industries in the world where there's no kind of like central body that governs anything. And that's probably good that it's like that, because photography is an art form and you should be able to breathe and do what you like in life. You shouldn't be governed by things. But there's not that many industries where there's no regulation at all. And so photography, until all photographers realise that they have worth, or they shouldn't be charging anything yet, until that happens, we're always going to get shafted. Pete's always going to be shafting you, because Pete doesn't know any better, and Pete's maybe desperate for that 50 quid this week. One of our biggest problems is self-inflicted. We're all far too eager, and I've been guilty of this in the past, of doing things on discounts and for next to nothing. And we've really shafted ourselves in the industry there, big time. So that's one issue. And when I say you shouldn't be charging until you feel like you're charging what you're worth, think about that long and hard. Is it better to get more experience and no pressure of having to deliver for money, get better before you start charging, or are you going to charge as you go? There might be some instances where you can get away with getting a few bob, but really think about it this way. If you've been photographing things for a year and you're charging 50 quid for a half-day shoot for a load of portraits, and you're giving them a whole CD full of portraits or a whole memory stick and giving them your copyright away as well, which I've seen happening, what are you saying about your worth? Because you've got a year's worth of experience, and it's not going to make any difference in 2 years' time or 3 years' time or 4 years' time. People are still going to expect you to give all that away because you gave it away initially. So think long and hard about what you're giving away before you give it. And I might talk about giving copyrights and stuff like that away in some other video, but it's one of the worst things that photographers can. It's one of the worst things that's happened to photography. So photographers have, in the main, shot themselves in the foot, stabbed themselves in the back, opened the door to abuse, basically. So the industry has kind of always known that, and even the high ends of the industry take the piss with fees. If you even speak to people like David Bailey and all the big wigs, they'll tell you that the fashion companies, fashion magazines, all the big players shaft photographers. That kind of ethos plays out across the whole of life, because photography, like many art forms, people don't understand the value of you as a human, as a creator. They think it's easy. They think anybody can do it, particularly now we've got mobile phones. Although this did happen when the box brownie was invented, and then Polaroids and all those other gizmos. Anybody's a photographer. And while that might be true, what people should be invested in is your experience and the quality you produce. And they don't, because, like I said previously, we've shot ourselves in the foot over years. But I think even the most inexperienced amongst you are worth more than what you think you're worth. And a good rule of thumb is, if you know your work is still crap, and by crap I mean you can't repeat the exact same thing to the exact same quality every time without thinking about it, don't be charging. Take the work experience. Explain to people. They understand you're doing it for work experience. They understand you don't want pain and why you don't want pain. And then when payday comes and you can finally say, look, this is where I am now. This is what my half day rate is. This is my day rate. This is what I charge per picture. These are my licensing agreements. I don't give copyright away. This is what this deal is for. Next deal might be this. Until you get to that point, don't do it. Don't charge 50 quid. Don't charge 200 quid for a day shoot. Be honest with yourself. Be brutal with yourself sometimes. Give yourself a chance to breathe and learn, and eventually charge what you're worth. It just made me realise that, you know, with the economy, with people's perceptions of photography being easy, with the onslaught of AI, which is being pushed out more and more and more and more. I mean, those god-awful adverts that you see with these professional photographers are, what did I do before Topaz AI? What did I do before this software fixed all my pictures for me? Well, I thought photographers used to take good pictures, didn't they? They didn't used to rely on anything to fix them for them. They used to understand shutter, ISO, all that stuff. And if the picture was shit, they wouldn't use it. They're going to shoot it again. But now the premise is on either don't worry about your shit pictures because AI can fix them, or don't even bother taking a picture because AI can make them. And when you put that into the mix and you look at somebody like Bruce Gilden saying that at his end of the spectrum, photography fees haven't gone up in 25 years. When you look at some of the absolute dross being published in the high-end magazines of late, people might say, don't say that one, shoot yourself in the foot. Listen, I've tried my best. I've worked hard to get some decent publications, but it became obvious to me 10 years ago that I was never going to be accepted in the higher echelons of magazine world. Face doesn't fit, opinions don't fit, and quite honestly, I couldn't do some of the stuff that would be expected to do and toe the line of what would be expected. So I'm not going to, by saying that I think I was optimistic that Vogue magazine might have turned the corner, but clearly looking at the latest stuff with Florence Pugh, it hasn't. And you know, it's not just about, I think there are better photographers out there shooting better stuff. There are, but it's the overall quality and wokeness and all that other bullshit stuff that gets in the way of real good photography, that stops me really being bothered about working in that. I used to really aspire to be a Vogue photographer or of somebody of that ilk, but as the longer I got into it, the more I worked in the celebrity end of stuff, the more I realised I really didn't want to work in that at all. So I'm not saying I wouldn't have liked at some point to have an Harper's Bazaar or a Vogue magazine cover to my name. I would, but I realised there are better things in photography out there than aspiring to be that. So that aside, the quality, the lack of payment, AI, people thinking photography is not worth anything. We're in a tricky spot, folks. We're kind of, it's up to us as photographers to fix this. And as I said on a previous podcast, the only way you can fix it is to stick your chest out and say, no, this is my worth, pay my worth. And until we all start doing that at both ends of the spectrum, at the amateur stroke, just coming into it, students charging a few quid instead of doing everything for nothing, right up to the Bruce Gilden kind of arena, people have got to pay us what we're worth. And you know, right now they can go down the AI route and get it for nitto, for nothing. But look at the state of AI. And I'm pretty sure that's kind of like responsible for some of the actual shit photography that's around. If you look at the AI stuff that's being pumped out, and people are accepting that as photography, then the person still doing photography has got a real low bar to aim for. If magazines and publishers are going to be happy with the AI-based creative shit that's being spewed out, that costs next to nothing and can done in no time, then the photographer coming up has got such a low bar that they're going to be able to hit it and probably pass it all the time. But that means that their work is shit. So the higher echelons, people that can charge more or should charge more or should be getting paid more, who have honed their craft, worked on their craft for years and always produce results, are going to be left behind. And if Bruce Gilden's saying that he's having to fund his own projects and he's going to be out of money soon, we need to get in there and help people like Bruce. People just stepping on the ladder, because it links right through. If Bruce can't get paid to do work and get it published, and the guy stepping on the ladder's doing it for £2 a picture, what's going to happen to photography with the constantly pumping of AI? And the biggest frustration for me is seeing professional photographers. I'm using that word quite loosely. I don't like the word professional. It doesn't really mean anything, does it, other than you get paid for doing it. But you know the guys I'm talking about that are suddenly jumping up on all these AI program adverts saying they don't know how they coped without it. Well, I know how you did it. You used to actually care about your craft. You used to actually take some time, make sure you were shooting well, make sure things were good, make sure you were in focus, make sure you were sharp, make sure there was no motion blur. You used to do all that stuff. But now, and if you didn't, you know, you'd cull it, you just wouldn't use it, you go back and reshoot it. But now, particularly Topaz Labs, and don't bin that photo. What the fuck is that all about? How are we going to train the next generation of photographers if we're going to get into a position where the software is that good? It isn't actually. When you use it, it's quite cartoony. But let's that aside. How are we going to teach our next lot of photographers, the ones who are going to come through and save the industry, how are we going to convince them to invest time to become good, to understand the technology, to understand the techniques, to bin stuff that's not sharp, that's got motion blur, that's way underexposed, that's coloured, all that stuff? How are we ever going to train them to be that good if all they do is go on Topaz and go click, 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 fix, use? At some point soon, if it hasn't already, the quality of photography is going to be so poor, the bar will be that low, people will probably stop doing it because it'll be less fuss and easier for trainee, wannabe, upcoming photographers to just use AI. And I don't want that to happen. I mean, photography, as you know, I believe photography has been around for thousands of years, not the 200 years. Funnily enough, I read, I think it was on Petapixel the other day, I read that the 200th anniversary of the discovery of photography was celebrated. And it's just like all those other definites in history that the article went on to say, well, we think it was 200 years ago, but he didn't fix that picture, so it might have been a year later, or it might be a year after that, or it might be. It's bullshit. It was just picked up again. It was like kind of refound at that point. It was a way, way, way before 1824, 5, 6. Trust me. Read my book. I'm not going to get into that. But it just made me realise that in 200 years, let's say, photography's gone from being a skill, a science, to a flimsy throwaway. Anybody can do it. And you know what companies and businesses are like? They're there to make money. And if they find a cheaper way of doing it, they'll do it. There are a lot of people out there who are visually illiterate. And it was interesting to hear I wasn't going to say David Bowie then. David Bowie probably wasn't, but David Bailey, in one of his interviews, said that quite often magazine editors and people who work in magazines are visually illiterate. And I think there's some truth in that, because when you look at some of the dross that makes it into the high-end magazines, you have to think. But it doesn't stop there, probably because of the state of the photography business for the mid to high-end photographers. I've now seen some what you might call prominent photographers on there selling some very dubious wares. And by dubious wares, I mean... So, let's put it this way. It probably took me shooting every day for 2.5, 3 years before I got to the point where I should have been charging good money. Where I was competent, I could refine, I could go again, I could shoot, edit, I had a process, all my imagery looked like mine. I knew what I was doing. If a client come in, I could say, I can sort that for you, I knew exactly what I was doing. If somebody said I want a picture like that, I could recreate it. Took me 2.5, 3 years of hard work. Probably in that 2.5, 3 years, from 2006 to 2009, I probably shot the same as what someone else might have done in 20 years to get better. That's how much practice I made. And I'm a very quick learner. I'm an exceptionally quick learner and an exceptionally good critique of myself. So then, when I log into Facebook, I think it was, and see a well-known photographer claiming that you can master the art of photography in 30 days with a bunch of presets and things, it just made my teeth fucking itch. The reason it makes my teeth itch is because it's a lie, isn't it? It's a fabrication. No photographer who has been shooting a couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years even, is going to master the art of photography in 30 days with a simple bunch of presets, which is just going to tart up the pictures you've taken probably badly in the first place. But when you look at the comments on things like that, they're all on there. Oh, this is amazing. What did I do before I found this? You know. And all the time I'm thinking, but what did you learn? Somebody else has worked hard to get a preset to do that on their photographs that are good to start with. So what you're going to do with your ropey, not quite right photographs with somebody else's presets, looking at a screen that's probably not calibrated, with no idea what your histogram does or what your histogram's telling you, but you're going to spend money on the presets instead of getting out there and practicing your ass off. I don't get it. I know everyone wants a shortcut to fame, I get that, but for me as a photographer, I want to bloody know what I'm doing. I don't want to walk into a studio and somebody set it up for me and all I do is click and get a great picture. Where's the owning that? Where is the pride in what you've done? Where is the I understand why that depth of field looks like that. I understand why that colour balance is like that. I understand why those lights were sat there. What's the point? And it's the same in the edit. Okay, I've done a shoot, it's like this. How do I get it to how I envisaged it? What skills do I need to know? Too many people now are just going whack. Somebody's done all the hard work, they just go whack on the preset or on the slider and it does this, and on their screen they think it looks great. They don't know why it looks great, they don't understand the colour, the tone, the clarity, the texture, the depth of field, they just go, oh, that suddenly looks a lot better than it did. Thank you. I'm so glad I bought those presets. And suddenly they're an amazing photographer when they're not. They're just a sap who's got sucked into believing that presets of any type are going to make them brilliant. And again, this is part of the reason why photography is eating itself and why photographers are killing themselves. Because they're not learning. They don't understand anymore. They're just mediocre at best artists who use other people's hard work to ride on the back of, to create mediocre pictures, which people think are great because the industry as a whole is now accepting mediocre pictures as being acceptable. And we've just got to work hard and get out of that. We've got to shout from the rooftops, I think. Because I don't want photography to die. I want my kids and my grandkids to still be taking photographs. They don't have to be professionals, but I want them to still be able to pick up a camera and make a memory that's a true memory and not a memory that's been invented by a machine from a few prompts. So today I'm finally going to talk about the dreaded Frankenskies. And what I mean by Frankenskies is those god-awful skies that we've had to endure for the last probably 50 years, I guess, but more recently, the last 2 decades, I've certainly noticed it. It began in the mid-late 2000s as I was getting into photography and I started doing landscape and skyscapes and all that stuff. At the time, I lived just on the outskirts of Manchester in the UK, pretty much on a flight path, but it wasn't the flight path that was bothering me so much as the more high altitude stuff. And some people will tell you that it's the high altitude and the air and all that that's causing the visuals. But I think anybody with half an ounce of brain can see that that is not and can't be the case. So I started taking pictures of the sky, like I said, mid-late 2000s, and noticed straight away that when high altitude planes were going over, some days they would just pass over without incident. Some days they would leave a heavy streak of, at the time, what I thought was steam or contrail. That would then slowly dissipate. But what I started to notice was it didn't just dissipate and disappear. It dissipated into grey cloud or heavy cloud or rain. And I started to think, surely there's not enough steam coming out of that to make such a mess of the sky. And coincidentally, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking the skies look crap. I mean, I was on the edge of Manchester, Cheshire, overlooking Saddleworth Moor, and unfortunately I can't show you any of those pictures because I had a hard drive failure. I know, schoolboy error, and I lost most of that stuff. But you've got lovely landscapes with these god awful skies that shouldn't have been. So I started investigating it, and I've always been into alternative theories on stuff, and I've always questioned narratives. Being a child of the 80s and Margaret Thatcher's times, I've always been sceptical of the truth and of governments and of authorities, and that led me down a few rabbit holes, eventually leading me up to a film that I've watched a million times, and it's one of those films that really does make you go, And if you Google the phrase Frankenskies and look at a film by Matt Landon, it basically, what that does is it uncovers the history of geoengineering experiments, climate engineering, and it becomes quite dark quite soon. I don't mean dark by dark skies, although they are dark. I mean, the concept becomes quite dark quite soon, and when you look at it, it becomes quite obvious, I think. And I've photographed it for a couple of decades. It's really obvious to me. And then you see people on social media, YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever it's bloody called now, posting pictures and still get a bit of ridicule, but not so much ridicule. I think more people are starting to, hang on a minute, there's something not right about that. And I think some of that is because governments are having to now put out narratives where they talk about cloud seeding and weather manipulation. Now, they're doing that under the guise of it's good for the environment because we're going to sort climate change, when really it's some of the stuff that's causing what appears to be a climate change. And if you just, search for things like weather modification, you'll find loads of articles talking about how the governments have now said, yeah, we have done this, we have done a bit of that. An example recently might be for the Olympics, was it? Wherein China spent millions of pounds on a shady project, it says if you Google it. Basically making it rain or not rain for the Olympics. And that's a thin end of the wedge. I mean, we soon get into terms like aluminium, or as our American friends like to call it, aluminum, which is found in rainfall, and quite quickly, without having to delve too deeply into books like David Icke's Trigger and Renegade, all those books that I've got out. I've just got some of my David Icke books out here because they're really good for quick referencing, because David is probably the best researcher I've ever come across, and if it's written in his books, he's discovered truths of stuff. So I use them for quick reference because my memory's shit. But it pretty quickly becomes obvious that it's not just about making it rain. It's deeper than that. And it pings quickly backlist to control, to disease, and all those other wondrous things that our lovely governments, shadow governments, like to do to us. So I'm going to talk about some of that stuff today, but I'm also going to show you some photographic evidence as to what I think constitutes, let's call them chemtrails as opposed to contrails. I mean, chemtrails is a bit of a wide spectrum name for them, because it's not always chemicals. Sometimes it is. Sometimes they are just conning us with weather modification. But I've got some pictures back here as far as 2014, I think, is my earliest one. If I just order these by date, I've got about, 3 bazillion terabytes of film and stills on the skies, and that's excluding. Went through a phase of backing up to Blu-ray DVD. Do you remember that? My brother he's really good at, Luke, my brother's really good at shit out of backing up. He hammers me for it all the time. And before hard drives became affordable, he used to back things up to me onto 50 gigabyte Blu-ray DVDs. So I've got a load of those, but some of those have started to corrupt and go a bit funny. So I've lost some of my earlier stuff, but I've got pictures back here from as far back as October 2014. So 10 years worth of Franken skies, shall we say. And within that, you'll see my versions of natural skies and not so natural skies. And one of the things that really kind of like irked me or pisses me off is how the dumb public, and I'm not talking to you guys, obviously, I'm talking to the dumb public, would say something like, oh, have you seen the beautiful sky tonight? What a beautiful sky. Oh my God, have you been out and seen the sky? What a sunset. And I'd go and look, and I'd see horror. I'd see something that can only be described as anything but beautiful. And if you look at this picture that's on screen now, you'll see what I mean. That is not by any stretch of anybody's imagination to be construed as a beautiful sunset. It's if anything, for me, it's a demonic sunset, which is pierced with these chemtrail, weather modification, awful substances which are devised to really destroy us. And I think if the narrative within the public eye was, until quite recently, I think, oh, look at that beautiful sunset. Oh, look at the, oh, isn't it great? Look at the clouds. Not thinking that what they're looking at is their own demise. And I think it's becoming more clear now because shadow governments are starting to have to say, oh, we might have done a little bit of weather modification. And then we get lunatics like Bill Gates, who is a bona fide psychopath and should be doing hard time in just about every country there is, talking about putting an umbrella over the world and reflecting sunlight, that thing that feeds life on the planet, to stop global warming. And I'm not going to get into that too much, but I think if you've got any ounce of sense or any ounce of critical thinking ability in you, you will pretty quickly work out that climate change is a tax scam, and all it is devised is for really is to make the poorest of us dead. And I think once you've crossed that line and figured that out, everything else kind of looks quite obvious. But I don't want to talk about that so much today. I really want to talk about the chemtrail thing and the Franken skies and how we've been conditioned to go, look at this beautiful sky, it's beautiful, it's amazing. How beautiful is that? When really, we should never see anything like that in our lifetime. And I'll show you some beautiful skies, and I'll show you the Franken skies. And hopefully you can make up your own minds as to what you think is good and bad. Photographically, even the manipulated Franken skies are interesting as far as photographs go, but anything other than beautiful in real terms, in human terms. And I think the more people realise that, and the quicker they realise that, the better, we can fight back and start to say, hang on a minute, what are our kids breathing in? What are the animals breathing in? What's falling on the grass that the animals are eating? That big dust layer that covered my car, that big grey dust layer, where's that really from? Sometimes they will say, oh, the Sahara Desert's blown some dust over to Europe. And everyone will go, oh, that's what that dust was on my car. Not realising they've had no real sunlight for days because the skies have been absolutely pummeled with aluminium, probably strontium, God knows what. So, would you honestly be able to tell me that you believe that is a natural sky? Again, excuse the sensor dust. Happens to us all. Now, of course, some of that will be natural. But this, and the mist, and the squiggles, and the crisscrosses, and all that other stuff, is not natural. Shouldn't be there. And not only should it not be there, it's probably going to kill us. And that's an inverted version of it, just so we can see more of what's going on. And the more I look at this, the more I got into it, the more I read about it. Not just David Icke's research, but other people's research. The Franken Skies film and the research that came off the back of that. Even if only 1% of that research is right, we're fucked. We're in for a bleak future. And the awful thing about that is that the powers that be know it. The people who are the Ed Miliband's of this world, that other horrendous specimen, Al Gore, they know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they're really good at guilt tripping people with a human tag and making people think, oh my God. But I'm 53 years old now, and for 53 years of my life, in 10 years, we're going to be underwater. In another 10 years, there'll be no natural resources left. In another 10 years, the ozone layer's going to have gone. In another 10 years, this and that. And none of it's come to fruition. None of it. That old, all the coastlines around the UK and America, anywhere that's got a coastline is going to be underwater. 15, 20, 100 feet underwater by the 90s, by the 2000s, by the 2010s. Then you see celebrities buying beachfront property. And then you see, in my favourite town, Liverpool, they've just built a £500 million football stadium on the docks, on the sea, 5 feet higher than the tide. There's as sure as hell no bank in this world going to lend money to anybody who wants to buy a beachfront property if that property is likely to be underwater in the next billion years. Why the hell in the world are you doing photography? And I guess you can put that across any specialism that you're doing. Why the hell are you a musician? Why the hell are you an actor? It came to me this week listening to a musical genius producer called Rick Rubin talking about why musicians should do things for themselves rather than anybody else. And it got me to thinking about my career and why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I do what I do. And it fundamentally comes back to the premise of pleasing myself. And I guess quite often artists don't look back on what they're doing themselves and give themselves any kind of credence. And I think that's because predominantly people are trying to impress other people all the time. And probably, luckily for me, a couple of years into my photography career, I realised that trying to please other people pleases nobody. And people won't buy into a pleaser, they're buying into the thing you do. So quite early on in my career, probably a couple of years in, I realised that I should be making pictures for me, not for them. And when I did that, it made me a completely different photographer. But not only that, it made me a better critic of my own work. But further than that, when you're producing work for yourself, when you're making stuff, be it your own project, be it a commercial gig, whatever it is, when you're making stuff, photographs, to please yourself, that's when other people start to buy into you. If you're making photographs to please other people, you're never going to please them. And that's because you won't really have a good angle or a good affinity with that work you're making. An example would be, I'm my own worst critic, or biggest critic, best critic, I guess. Worst critic's the wrong phrase. I am my own biggest critic. But within that critique, I'm being honest. And I can only be honest with myself if I'm making work to please my own standards. And quite often, I think, quite often photographers don't do that. They're too busy trying to please everybody else. So when I started just trying to please myself, first and foremost, whether I'm shooting fashion, buildings, skyscapes, nightscapes, puppy dogs, whatever I'm doing, I'm looking at that picture as I'm going through my selections and I'm saying, is that the best I can do? Is that the most creative? Is it any fucking good? And if I don't get a yes and affirmative to all of those things, then the pictures won't see the light of day. They'll end up on the cutting room floor, as they say. They'll end up in the bin. And you can see this. You can see this across my work. But even just on these pictures I've got on screen now, taking snapshots of our pup Paddy when we got him. Just taking random pictures of him, and most of them are dog shit. Most of them will never see the light of day. But within that, you come to a space and you go, oh, actually, that was interesting. That's really what I was trying to do. And although these aren't for commercial use, they're only my wife and me and the kids seen them. When I'm looking through them, I am thinking, my God, that's a load of shit. Oh my God, that's a load of shit. Oh dear, that's a load of shit. And this is just taking snapshots of our dog. And when you come to them and you look at them, as in you're going to edit them, you've already gone through that process of pleasing yourself. And if you don't know what pleasing yourself is, if you're not making pictures to please yourself, if you're making them to try and convince other people to like you or to buy into you, then you can't ever go through the process of culling them down to only show your best, to only show the ones that really work. And I don't think I've picked a very good folder here, to be fair, because oh shit. But the idea is, you know what you want to produce, you know the quality, you know the aesthetic, you know the composition, you know the exposure, you know all that stuff you want to produce. And you instinctively know then if you don't produce it, Like I've just said, all these pictures are just snapshots and they're all over shit, really. Probably one that's worth using or showing. But because I'm shooting to please myself, not shooting to please my wife or my neighbour or a client or whoever it is, then I know when things are right and when things are wrong. And how can you expect the wider public, potential clients or actual clients, to buy into your aesthetic if every photo shoot you do, you're trying to please somebody else and not yourself? So, yeah, just reading that quote or listening to that quote from Rick Rubin just made me realise that I think that's what's wrong with a lot of photography. I've said this before and I'll say it again, there's a lot of mediocre crap out there. There's a lot of good marketers who aren't very good at photography, but they're very good at marketing. And they get work, and they get plaudits, and they get applause, and they get all that other wondrous stuff. Oh, you're awesome. Because they're good at marketing, not at photography. And I think, well, I pretty much know, actually, that the main issue why they're not very good is because they're not pleasing themselves. They're just shooting any old shit in the hope that somebody looking will like it. And then they're very good at marketing, so they market their way into places. What are the benefits from pleasing yourself? Well, the main benefit for me is that what lines up your aesthetic, your look, your style, your feel. Somebody books me for a shoot, they know what they're going to get. They're going to get technical incompetence, and they're going to get my style, how I shoot, how I angle, how I edit. They're going to get that. And that only came about from pleasing myself. And by pleasing myself, I mean all of those things I've just discussed there. I mean, I'm just looking through his pictures here of Jess. Jess is a lovely model I've worked with a couple of times over the years. And you can see, if you look through these pictures now, I'm just scrolling through. We were aiming for a certain look. And Jess looks great on every shot. But I'm just waiting for the shot. For the one that makes me go, oh, actually, that's the one. That's the one. That's the one. And there are what? There are about 30 shots maybe in that set. For me, just trying to get the one. That's not bad, is it? In old money, that's a roll of film. And they're all very similar. The aesthetics are all very similar. They're all very tight shot. Jess looks great at them all. But you're looking for the money shot. And the photographers I'm talking about who are great marketers but shit photographers don't know what the money shot is. So they'll pick any shot or they'll use any out of that. And the amount of photographers I've stood with, either mentoring them or just stood talking to them while they're selecting pictures, and I see them scrolling and scrolling, and they go past the one that you know is the money shot, and they never see it, and they pick another one which is probably, in the grand scheme of things, only about 20% off being the right shot, but nevertheless it's off being the right shot, and they use that and edit it. And I'm standing there thinking, oh man, if you'd have just gone back a couple of shots, that was it, that was the one. And quite often it's difficult, when you're looking through them, particularly as thumbnails, to figure that out. And you need to, bring them up into the real world, and you can look at them side by side, and you can just see the minor changes. What is it you're looking for? And eventually, you come to the one, and you go, actually, that was the money shot. That was the one I was looking for. And you can see, Jess is great, she's a great model. I hope she doesn't mind me using these, but a little awkward, not so awkward. A little awkward, not so awkward. And it is just about finding that shot that just hits the money. And a lot of it depends on what you're looking for aesthetically and what you're trying to gain from that shot. But I find that if you're trying to please yourself here, not trying to please the model, not trying to please the client, I'm saying I'm looking for this thing. The right shot gets taken and the right selection gets made. So all those mediocre photographers out there, they've got thousands of followers on Instagram and Facebook and all those other wondrous places. 500px, remember that? Remember 500px? And getting comments from people who don't know any better, and you're sitting there going, huh? That's a lot of shit. How did that happen? It's because they don't shoot for themselves. They're shooting to please other people, to get likes, to get loves, to think they're great, and they're never shooting their best work because they're always shooting to please somebody other than themselves. So next time you're thinking about going out to shoot and you're, you're pleasing other people, maybe don't be doing that. Shoot to please yourself. Shoot to please yourself and see if that makes any great difference to your output and to the respect you get from your actual peers rather than the fake peers who shoot to please other people for likes. I found personally that once I'd started shooting to please me, everything got better. Like I said earlier, my own critique became legendary to myself because I stopped using 10 pictures out of every 30 and started using one, and that one was better in every single way, creatively, technically, aesthetically, was better because it aligned with what I wanted, it aligned with my desires, it aligned with my the perfectionist in me, which I had to kind of grow out a little bit. I've talked about that on previous podcasts. That perfectionist who just looking for the perfect shot all the time, missing the moment, and that stopped happening so much when I was shooting for other people. And I think you can't grow as an artist, you can't be confident as an artist, you can't stand in front of clients and say, this is me, this is what I do, this is who I am, buy into it, if you're really not shooting work for yourself. Shooting for yourself, pleasing yourself first, and that's where it really comes down to. Whatever you're doing, whether you're doing it for test work, whether you're doing it to practice, whether you've got a new idea, whether you're getting paid £1,000, whatever it is, if you're shooting to try and please somebody else first, you're never going to get there. You'll get mediocre, you'll get some people like it, the other client might like it, but the client might sit back and go, well, he didn't really know what he was doing, did he? I didn't believe him, didn't believe in what he wanted, what he thought, what he felt. And I think as any kind of artist, whether you're a photographer, painter, an illustrator, musician, strangely, this idea coming from Rick Rubin that this is where most musicians fall down, is they're making music, writing and making music to please other people apart from themselves first. And being a former pro musician, I can understand that, I get that. But when I was a musician, all the songs I wrote, all the rehearsals I did, all the things I did were to please me first, to be the best I could. And I eventually followed that into photography. And if you're not doing that, people aren't going to buy into it, not long term. They want to believe in you. If you're confident in yourself, your ability, you're your own biggest critic, eventually people buy into you because they see that, and that's when the work is repeatable. If I wind it all back, it comes down to what I started with, being your own worst critic, being your own best critic, and pleasing yourself first. Why am I a photographer? I love taking pictures. What do you love about taking pictures? That buzz I get when I see what I've created from the knowledge I've learned. Is it good or is it bad? Mostly good. If it's very good, I'm happy. I've pleased myself. If anybody else is happy, then that's great. But fundamentally, I've got to please myself first. Thanks for tuning into the Lance Burkitt Encounter today. I really do appreciate you spending some time with me here in the world of photography, education and reality. If you enjoyed the episode and feel like you learned a bit of something, do me a favour, like, subscribe and share the channel with somebody you feel really needs to hear it. And if you're able to, and if you'd like to, please head over to lanceburkitt.com/shop and treat yourself to some of the Lance Burkitt Encounter merchandise. After all, that's how we're going to keep the channel and the podcast alive and completely independent. Until next time, keep shooting with purpose and stay true to yourselves. Cheers.